gold. Throughout human history, it has been the ultimate symbol of wealth. It builds empires, backs currencies, dictates the flow of global trade, and more often than not, starts wars. For the past century, the Sahel region of West Africa has been the world's quiet gold mine, a vast reservoir of mineral wealth that has fueled the vaults of foreign nations, while its own people remain trapped in a cycle of poverty. Mali alone stands as the third largest gold producer on the African continent. Every single year, nearly 70 tons of pure gold are pulled from its soil, processed and shipped away. Yet a paradox has haunted this region for decades, a question that every young person in Bamako, Ouagadougou and Niamey has asked: why is the land so rich yet the people so poor? For generations, the answer was dismissed as bad governance, lack of infrastructure, or simply the misfortune of geography. But the truth was far more calculated. The poverty of the Sahel was not an accident, it was a design. It was hidden in the fine print of secret contracts, buried in colonial mining codes that were never meant to be read by the public, and obscured by a global financial system that prioritizes the stock prices of Toronto and London over the welfare of the Sahelian people. The gold was dug up in Africa, but the profits were counted in Switzerland. But in 2025, that era came to a screeching halt. The vault door was slammed shut, led by Colonel Assimi Goïta in Mali and Captain Ibrahim Traoré in Burkina Faso. The Alliance of Sahel States, NAES, has declared a new kind of war. This is not a war fought with bullets and mortars, but with audits, laws, and refineries. They are rewriting the rules of engagement, kicking out the foreign giants who refuse to play fair, and building their own industrial capacity. They have effectively declared that the open bar is closed. This is the story of the Great Gold War, the mechanism of the theft that lasted for decades, and the bold, dangerous strategy that is reclaiming billions for the African people. To understand the magnitude of what is happening today, one must first understand the weapon that was used against Africa for the last 60 years. It wasn't a gun, it was a pen. The exploitation of Sahelian gold was legal. It was codified in mining laws that were often drafted with the assistance of former colonial powers and international financial institutions. Under these old mining codes, and the state of Mali or Burkina Faso was typically entitled to a meagre 10% stake in their own mines. This was the industry standard known as free carried interest. The remaining 90% belonged to foreign multinational corporations, giants based in Canada, Australia, and Europe. Consider the implications of that ratio. It is your sovereign territory, it is your ancestral land, it is your non-renewable resource that, once taken, is gone forever. Yet for every 10 bars of gold extracted, the country keeps only 1. The foreign corporation takes 9. They argued that this was necessary to cover the risks of investment and the high costs of exploration. But the math never added up. Even with that 10%, the revenue that actually reached the national treasury was often a fraction of what was promised. This brings us to the second layer of the trap, the accounting loopholes. Multinational mining corporations are masters of a practice known as transfer pricing. In simple terms, a mining company in Mali might sell its raw gold at a discount to a subsidiary company it owns in a tax haven like Switzerland or the Cayman Islands. On paper, the company in Mali makes very little profit, which means it pays very little tax to the Malian government. Meanwhile, the subsidiary in Switzerland sells the gold at the full market price, realizing massive profits where taxes are virtually zero. It is a shell game. The wealth is transferred out of Africa before it can even be taxed. For decades, African leaders who tried to change this system were met with threats of international arbitration, capital flight, or worse, coup d'etat. However, the geopolitical earthquake of the last few years has changed the calculus. The rise of the military governments in the Sahel was driven by a rejection of this very system. In late 2023 and throughout 2024, the Malian government, under Assimi Goïta, ordered a comprehensive forensic audit of the entire mining sector. They stopped taking the company's word for it and started looking at the books. The results were explosive. The audit revealed a financial black hole. It uncovered a shortfall of nearly 300 billion to 600 billion CFA francs, equating to roughly 500 million to 1 billion US dollars, that was owed to the state by mining companies due to irregularities, unpaid taxes, and unauthorized export of funds. The audit exposed what many had suspected: the mines were producing far more gold than they were declaring, and the state was being bled dry. The reaction from Bamako was swift and unforgiving. The government announced that they would recover these funds by any means necessary. This audit served as the foundation for the revolutionary New Mining Code adopted by Mali. This legislation is perhaps the most significant economic shift in West Africa since independence. Under the new law, the rules of ownership have been radically rewritten. The state is no longer satisfied with a 10% handout. The new code allows the government to take a 10% free stake, plus the option to purchase an additional 20% stake for cash. On top of that, a mandatory 5% stake must be reserved for local private investors. When you do the math, domestic ownership, state plus local private sector, can now reach 35%. Jumping from 10% to 35% is not just a policy tweak. It is a structural revolution. It fundamentally shifts the balance of power from the boardroom in Toronto to the presidential palace in Bamako. Furthermore, the new code abolishes many of the tax holidays and customs exemptions that allowed companies to import fuel and equipment tax-free. The message is clear: if you want to extract our gold, you will pay your fair share and you will respect our sovereignty. Across the border in Burkina Faso, Captain Ibrahim Traoré has taken an even more aggressive ideological stance. Traoré, often echoing the spirit of Thomas Sankara, has viewed the mining sector not just as a source of revenue, but as a battleground for independence. He has publicly criticized the fact that Burkina Faso is one of Africa's top gold producers, yet its people lack basic electricity and water. His administration has begun withdrawing mining permits from companies that violate the terms of their contracts or fail to pay their taxes. He famously stated in a public address that Burkina Faso is ready to recover these licenses and mine the gold themselves if necessary. This shattered the long-held myth that African nations are incapable of managing complex industrial operations without Western oversight. But owning the mine is only half the battle. The leaders of the AES realized that the real money in the gold industry isn't in the digging, it is in the refining. For decades, Mali and Burkina Faso exported what is known as doré bars, semi-pure bars that contain gold mixed with silver and other impurities. These bars are flown to refineries in Switzerland, Dubai, or South Africa to be processed into 99.999% pure investment-grade bullion. This system meant two things. First, the Sahelian nations lost out on the value-added profit of refining. Second, and more importantly, they lost the chain of custody. Once the unrefined gold leaves the airport in Bamako, the government essentially relies on the refinery in Europe to tell them exactly how much pure gold was in the shipment. It is a system built on blind trust, and in the world of high finance, trust is a liability. To close this loop, the AES launched a strategic industrialization plan. In November 2024, Mali officially inaugurated the Kankou Moussa refinery in Bamako. Named after Emperor Mansa Musa of the Mali Empire, who is historically regarded as the richest man to ever live, the symbolism could not be more potent. This is not a small workshop. It is an industrial complex with the capacity to process 200 tons of gold per year, more than the country's entire annual industrial output. The construction of this refinery, built with technical cooperation from Russian state corporations, changes the geopolitical map of gold. It allows Mali to process its own resources on its own soil. It creates high-tech engineering jobs for Malian citizens. It ensures absolute transparency in the production figures. But most strategically, it allows the state to stockpile refined gold bars in its own central bank. This is the ultimate endgame. By refining gold domestically, the AES nations can build physical gold reserves to back their currency. In a world where fiat currencies are losing value and the weaponization of the US dollar has made many nations wary, gold remains the only truly neutral asset. If the AES proceeds with their plan to launch a new common currency to replace the CFA franc, having vaults full of internationally certified gold bullion in Bamako and Ouagadougou provides the kind of economic legitimacy that no sanctions regime can destroy. The reaction from the West has been a mixture of panic and hostility. Stock prices of major mining companies operating in the region have seen volatility as investors fear nationalization. Diplomatic cables warn of the loss of influence and the Russian pivot. There are threats of international lawsuits and arbitration hearings. We are already seeing a narrative forming in Western media that paints these moves as illegal seizures or authoritarian overreach. But the AES leaders are standing firm, calculating that the world needs their gold more than they need the world's approval. The gold war is far from over. It is entering its most dangerous phase. The mining giants will not give up their super profits easily. They will lobby their home governments to apply pressure. We may see covert attempts to destabilize the mining regions, creating security crises that justify the return of foreign military intervention. We may see economic sanctions designed to strangle the importation of chemicals like cyanide and mercury needed for gold processing. However, the dynamic has fundamentally shifted. The people of the Sahel have woken up to the reality of their wealth. They have seen the numbers. They know that $500 billion worth of resources has left their land over the last century with little to show for it. The actions of Goïta and Traoré have restored a sense of dignity that cannot be quantified on a balance sheet. They are proving that the poverty of Africa is not inevitable. It is artificial. And by dismantling the mechanisms of that artificial poverty, the bad contracts, the tax havens, the lack of industry, they are charting a path toward true sovereignty. The gold of the Sahel will no longer pave the streets of Geneva or finance the deficits of Paris. It is being reclaimed to build the schools, hospitals, roads and railways of the Sahel. This is a high-stakes gamble, perhaps the biggest in modern African history. But for the first time in 60 years, the cards are in African hands, and they are playing to win. The vault is locked, the refinery is running, and the world is watching.